Have you ever come across something so intriguing that it seems impossible to ignore? The Ethiopian Bible is exactly that, a true historical enigma, so little known that it seems almost hidden from the world. We're not talking about fiction or vague legends, but about a book that contains stories and records that many people don't even know exist. Ethiopia, where this Bible was born, is also surrounded by historical facts that draw attention. A country that has never been colonized, preserving its cultural identity and roots in a unique way. This isolation has allowed them to maintain traditions so ancient that they date back, according to some accounts, to the lineage of Ham, son of Noah. This connection with biblical stories is not just an allegation. Even Jewish records support this idea. However, the focus here is not on the country itself, but on what it holds. The Ethiopian Bible is unlike any other you've ever heard of. Unlike the King James Version, which contains 66 books, it has 88. Among them are texts that no other church or denomination has ever considered including. And the most impressive thing, these texts existed long before Christianity was formally established in the country in the 4th century. This brings us to something really interesting. Contrary to what happened in many nations, Christianity was not brought or imposed on Ethiopia. It was already part of the local culture. From ancient times, the country was recognized as a place where this faith already flourished. In the 6th century, a traveler and monk called Cosmas Indicopleustes documented how Ethiopia was a refuge for persecuted Christians, welcoming them with open arms at a time when Christianity was facing resistance and even hostility in other parts of the world. That's not all. Some Ethiopian communities claim to have worshipped the Christian God for over 3,000 years. This calls into question a widespread idea that the Catholic Church is the oldest Christian organization. In fact, this title belongs to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, known locally as Tewahdo. Among its treasures is one of the first illustrated Christian books ever found, written in Ge'ez, an ancient Ethiopian language. Discovered in a monastery on top of a mountain in 2010, this gospel is a living testimony to the historical and spiritual depth of this people, and it doesn't stop there. One of Ethiopia's most important sacred texts is the Kebra Nagast, which tells a fascinating story. According to it, in the 10th century BC, the Queen of Sheba visited Jerusalem to seek wisdom from King Solomon. This story even appears in the traditional Bible, but what it doesn't mention is that Menelik, who would become the first emperor of Ethiopia, was born from this relationship. Genetic studies carried out in 2012 reinforce this narrative, showing a connection between the Ethiopian and Middle Eastern peoples that goes back 3,000 years, the period when the Queen ruled. Despite all this historical and cultural richness, the Ethiopian Bible remains ignored by many Christian traditions. Even among believers themselves, few people know of its existence. This leads us to an inevitable question: why is this book so little mentioned? It seems that there has been a deliberate effort to keep it on the sidelines, as if its relevance was something that should be silenced. But what motivated this? To answer that, we need to look to the past and understand the events that shaped the way Christianity was consolidated in the world. From here, the story gets even more interesting. The Bible we know today has undergone so many changes and adaptations that it's hard to imagine what it was like in the past. In its original form, it wasn't a single volume, but a collection of texts written at different times, with varying interpretations of what they meant. From the beginning, the texts were written in Hebrew before being translated into other languages. How many times have you reflected on how so many historical and spiritual truths seem to have been lost over time? This unease can arise when we realize that what we know may only be part of something much bigger. What if I told you there was a way to explore these answers and connect the hidden dots of history? The ebook, The Forbidden Name of Jesus, brings together revealing information accessible to anyone who wants to deepen their spiritual journey. You can access it at the link I left in the first comment above. Take the opportunity to uncover what has been hidden for so long and transform your understanding of divine truths. The first important translation was made by St. Jerome, who played a crucial role in the history of the scriptures. Around the year 400, he translated the Hebrew texts into Latin, creating the version known as the Vulgate. This translation became the basis for many of the Latin versions that followed and is still a reference today. At that time, the Bible consisted of 27 books in the New Testament and 39 in the Old Testament, forming what was called the Hebrew Bible. In the first century, many other books appeared, written about the life and teachings of Jesus. However, not all of these texts were authentic. Many of them were created by authors who invented stories, almost as if they were fictional tales based on the life of Jesus. The big problem is that these writings gained ground and influence, confusing the public, who often believed that these stories were true accounts. It's important to remember that at the time, there was no means of quickly or reliably verifying the authenticity of these works. Without today's technology, such as the internet to check facts, these stories spread unchecked. Fake books circulated widely, creating confusion and even distorting people's perception of Jesus' teachings. The impact of this was so significant that the leaders of the early church became concerned about the direction these publications could take. To resolve this situation, religious leaders met at decisive moments in the church's history, such as the Council of Nicaea in 325 after Christ and the First Council of Constantinople in 381. During these meetings, they discussed which books should be included in the New Testament. The criteria established were strict. The text had to have been written by someone who was a direct follower of Jesus or by someone who witnessed him teaching. In addition, only books written in the first century that fit in with the overall message of the Bible would be accepted. Even after these decisions, the changes to the Bible didn't stop there. Centuries later, during the reign of King James I, another significant transformation took place. Although the Vulgate had been widely used for over 500 years, there were several different versions of the Bible circulating at the beginning of the 17th century. This diversity led to religious disagreements and worried the monarch. The king wanted a unified version of the Bible that would not only resolve these differences, but also strengthen his authority as ruler. In addition, many priests of the time put pressure on the king, arguing that some available translations had errors that could compromise the faith of the faithful. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, King James I decided to take action. He gathered together 47 highly skilled scholars, dividing them into 6 groups to revise all the existing translations and create a new version. These groups worked on different parts of the project independently for 7 years. The rules for this work were extremely strict. The scholars had to avoid any kind of personal bias or prejudice, focusing exclusively on maintaining accuracy in relation to the original languages. They used various tools and methods to ensure that the new translation was as faithful as possible to the ancient texts. The intention was to produce a Bible that was not only accurate, but also accessible to the people of the time. After years of hard work, the results began to appear. When the texts produced by the different groups were compared, it was clear that they came to very similar conclusions, even though they had worked separately. This was interpreted as a manifestation of divine guidance, something that both the king and the priests recognized. As a result, the new translation was approved, consolidating the version we know today as the King James Bible. Don't put off what could change your spiritual understanding. Download the forbidden name of Jesus now and discover truths that few have the opportunity to know. In 1611, it was published and quickly gained prominence thanks to the advances of the printing press. For the first time, the scriptures became widely accessible, allowing people from different regions to have direct contact with the sacred texts. However, this edition of the Bible, like the previous translation by St. Jerome with the Vulgate, excluded several books that were not considered essential or divinely inspired. Meanwhile, the Ethiopian Bible kept all the scriptures intact, preserving texts that other traditions decided to abandon. Now that we understand the historical background of the different versions of the Bible, the central question arises: why was the Ethiopian Bible rejected by the main Christian traditions? The main reason involves so-called pseudo-epigraphs, which are texts falsely attributed to authors or figures from the past. These writings were often created by people who took advantage of well-known names to give credibility to their works, which in a way resembles invented stories or fan fictions. For the predominant Christian traditions, these books were not considered canonical, that is, they were not recognized as divinely inspired. During the process of selecting the texts, theologians and scribes identified these writings as being, for the most part, works with questionable intentions. Many of these texts appeared before and after the time of Jesus, but the scholars of the time believed that allowing them to be included would cause confusion among the faithful. The logic behind this decision can be understood with a modern example. If today someone published a book claiming that a renowned athlete like Kobe Bryant was not a great player, people would quickly reject the idea because they know it's not true. But if that same book survived for 500 years unchallenged, future generations might start to believe that it was a fact. So removing these texts from the Bible was a way of preventing misleading ideas from being perpetuated over time. Still, it's important to note that even the Ethiopian Bible recognizes some internal divisions regarding what should and shouldn't be included. It presents two distinct canons, the broader and the narrower. But before we explore this difference, it is essential to understand what the word canon means. In simple terms, a canon is a criterion or set of rules that defines something as authentic or acceptable. With this in mind, it is clear that each version of the Bible was shaped by a set of criteria that religious leaders believed to be most appropriate for the time. The broader canon of the Ethiopian Bible is the best known and contains a total of 81 books. This version includes texts such as the Book of Enoch, the Jubilees, the 3 books of the Maccabees, the Epistle to Clement, and the 4 books of the Synod, among others. It is this more comprehensive version that tends to be at the center of discussions and which arouses so much interest. On the other hand, there is the narrow canon, which was developed under the direct supervision of Emperor Haile Selassie. He proclaimed this version to be the official and complete Ethiopian Bible, with some significant changes. The narrow canon has only 72 books, excluding some scriptures that appear in the wider version. Although the exact reasons for these changes are not known, probably because of issues that could generate deep controversy, the fact is that this decision generated controversy within the Ethiopian tradition itself. It is interesting to note that the wider canon has not been reprinted since the beginning of the 20th century, which has also contributed to its gradual disappearance from public access. Few people will have access to the knowledge revealed in the forbidden name of Jesus. Take advantage of it while it's still available and discover secrets that could transform your spiritual outlook. These internal differences between the two canons show that even within the Ethiopian Bible itself, there are disputes over what should be considered sacred or official. This division alone could justify why it faces resistance in being accepted by other traditions. After all, if there is so much discussion within the Ethiopian tradition itself, it is not difficult to understand why other Christian groups prefer to distance themselves from it. The Ethiopian canon offers a fascinating insight into how the Bible has evolved over the centuries. Contrary to what many people think, the Bible is not a single, closed book, but a collection of texts and accounts of human experiences, written at different times in history. This diversity is what makes it so rich, but it is also what generates questions and controversies. The main point of tension is precisely this plurality. Different religious groups, whether widely accepted or not, have a long history of including or excluding certain texts based on theological motivations and often personal interests. The version of the Bible we know today, widely used by Christian traditions, began to take shape between the 4th and 5th centuries after Christ. However, during this same period, Ethiopian Christianity was already following a different path, distancing itself from European Christianity and the prevailing practices around the Mediterranean. This difference only increased over the centuries. Even so, the Ethiopian Bible retains many similarities with the Catholic and Orthodox versions. However, what makes it unique are the extra books of the Old Testament, which were probably written during the last centuries before the Christian era, in the period that marks the end of the Old Testament but precedes the New Testament. Furthermore, there are additional texts at the end of the New Testament that deal with themes linked to the history and organization of the Ethiopian Church, reflecting its specific practices and beliefs. One of the factors that contributed to the Ethiopian Bible's rejection by wider Christian traditions is the language in which it was written, Ge'ez. This ancient Ethiopian language is little known outside the region, which makes it difficult to access for those who don't speak or study the language. The lack of translations over the years has also contributed to it remaining little known outside Ethiopia. This, coupled with practices specific to the Ethiopian Church, has helped to keep it away from the global scene for a long time. Another, more controversial reason involves political issues. During the first centuries of Christianity, political power played a central role, especially in the context of the Roman Empire. The emperor and religious leaders of the time were more concerned with consolidating authority and the official narrative than with fostering spiritual growth. Texts that didn't fit the official view were systematically discarded. There are reports that the Bishop of Rome ordered priests to destroy scrolls that were not part of the approved Bible. However, many of these priests disobeyed, hiding the texts in casks that were discovered near the Dead Sea in the 1940s. This discovery helps explain some of the differences between the Ethiopian Bible and other versions. Access to the forbidden name of Jesus is available, but may end soon. Don't miss this chance to explore the hidden mysteries that history has tried to conceal. In essence, while one version seeks to present a complete set of scriptures, the other reflects only what was considered acceptable by the human criteria of the time. Even so, in recent years, the Ethiopian Bible has aroused growing interest. Researchers and the curious seek to understand what makes it so special and what truths it may contain that are not available in other versions. The Ethiopian churches, for their part, have worked to make the text more accessible, promoting translations into other languages and encouraging academic studies on the content and history of this canon. The fact that this Bible has survived so many adverse events is impressive in itself. The country faced Muslim invasions, Italian occupations, and even a fire that destroyed a church in a monastery where the Bible was kept in the 1930s. Despite everything, the text remained intact, which only adds to the fascination and curiosity surrounding it. After all, its survival seems almost a testament to its importance and endurance throughout history. If you enjoyed the content and would like to support our work so that we can continue to bring you more in-depth research and analysis, please consider making a donation of $100. This contribution directly helps the channel grow and produce even richer material. Thank you very much for your support.